Hey, Carl here. The following podcast was recorded at noon on Monday, February 24th, 2025. All information presented was true and valid up until the time of recording. Let's get started. Welcome to Crayon Box Politics Weekly, your go-to podcast for breaking down the latest in state and federal legislation. I'm Carl, a retired Marine turned political enthusiast, here to help you stay informed and engaged.
And as always, I'm Avery, your co-host on this journey. Together, we're here to unpack policies and decisions shaping our lives one bill at a time.
Starting this week, we're going to do some things a little different.
In keeping with President Musk's mandate to federal workers,
We're going to provide a weekly progress report,
starting with Congress,
moving into executive actions.
and we're going to finish with the state legislation.
So grab your favorite color from the crayon box and let's draw some clarity from the chaos. All right, starting with the branch of government that Elon Musk would love to fire because they're the least productive branch. And digging into the House, Avery, I don't know about you, but the House was not in session last week and still managed to be productive on the introduction of legislation side with 129 total pieces of legislation. Of that, 117 were bills, 10 resolutions, one concurrent resolution, which was the concurrent resolution on the House side dealing with the budget, and one joint resolution.
Yeah, the Senate was in session and they lacked any sort of oomph or anything to get shit done, which that's not unusual. They struggled, as always. They only had 90 pieces that came through, 78 of them being bills. We had 8 simple resolutions, 1 or 4 joint resolutions, and it was something else. They do what they do, and they just sit around and they just look at each other still. I think, like you said, President Musk would shut them down immediately, take away all their funding.
It would be interesting for them to have to sit in front of the 19-year-old and justify their existence because, like all the federal employees that are having to do, I think that they would be sweating because they're unable to justify why they exist.
Yeah, I completely get that. At least the Senate, they were in session and they did stare at each other. Speaking of which, they stayed all night Thursday night because they had things to vote on, mainly the budget, and it's all night. Like they didn't leave until like 5 o'clock in the morning. It was crazy, and it was all over the Senate Resolution 7, and which was eventually agreed to, but it had 1,131 amendments. Like the crap. And what was crazy about it is only 33 of those amendments actually got proposed out of the 1,131 that were submitted. And of the 33, 25 of them were roll call votes, and 22 of them got not agreed to. So, the Republicans were just like, yeah, go ahead. No, we're not doing that. Nope, we're not going to do that one either. No, still nothing. So, they didn't want to actually do their job. They just wanted to say no. No.
I think one of those amendments was an amendment to prevent any type of reduction in spending with regards to the PACT Act, which is, for you and me, veteran friendly
Absolutely.
and something that we actually want to have happen. And that one got rejected
By a lot.
hands down.
Yeah. And, from what I had read, some of these, the Democrats were like, hey, can we put in there that we're not going to have any tax cuts for people who, have, $100 million? And they're like, nope. They're like, okay, $400 billion. They're like, nope. They're like $1 billion. And they're still like, nope. So they did it's tax cuts for everybody, but the people who actually need them and deserve them. I will say though, we did have two amendments that were agreed to, and it was Senate Amendment 1029, which established a deficit neutral reserve fund relating to protecting Medicare and Medicaid. So there's that. I mean, that is at least a silver lining.
Oh, that one passed? I thought I had
Yes.
read that it didn't pass.
Nope. It was agreed to. And then they had Senate Amendment 922, which was establishing a deficit neutral reserve fund relating to Congress continuing its work to rein in the administrative state by supporting legislation that prevents spending and resulting from, or I'm sorry, and releasing from regulations from costly regulations that reduces inflation and unleashes economic growth. So, I mean, they're at least trying, I guess, to like make things better.
Well, the interesting thing about that bill overall, right? The Republicans have run consistently on this desire to decrease the deficit. And when I kind of downloaded that bill and I looked at it, and it was enlightening to me to see exactly what that bill does. And when you actually break it down, the the budget that they're passing allows for an increase in the national deficit of $1.2 trillion by the end of 2034. So over the next decade, we're going to increase the deficit. So the borrowing spending that we're doing by about 1.2 trillion. Right now it's 0.7 trillion. And to that end, looking at the projected national debt. Now, this is again in a vacuum, not counting any type of savings that Doge may or may not fraudulently claim they're going to do. But over the next decade, this bill would provide for an increase in the national debt by roughly $12 trillion. I don't understand how Republicans keep running on this mantra of, oh, we need to balance the budget, oh, we need to make sure that we're cutting costs and cutting spending, when in reality their very bill, that this very thing that they voted on, is going to do nothing to decrease our debt or decrease our deficit spending, and only increase it. So it's one of those things that it's funny to me when you actually break it down by the nuts and bolts, what it looks like and how this is going to play out over the next decade. So that's just the thing that jumped out to me about this resolution.
There was I want to say like the black sheep of the bills. There was one that was ruled out of order, and it was Senate Amendment 1156. It didn't. I didn't read exactly what the purpose was, because usually it's only out there when it's proposed, and it was already pointed out of order. So that'll be interesting to see if and when they provide the details of it. So it was just like, okay, why, so we'll get answers. And once I find answers, I'll let everybody know. But again, you just sit and stare at people all week just to sit there and argue with people for 15 hours just to ram things down people's throat and have it passed. I mean, the Democrats didn't have to do anything because I mean, it was going to get passed regardless. So, and a lot of things was partisan. So that's what we're stuck on.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, and I think the bigger unfortunate piece about this is that it's being pushed as a budget reconciliation, same way that the Democrats did it at the beginning of Biden's term. It's interesting because of that fact. It's only going to need in both houses a simple majority vote rather than the 60 vote requirement that it would have needed had it been passed as a real bill in the Senate. So interesting to see how this plays out. I know the House just introduced on the 18th HCon Res 14, which is the House version of the Senate bill. So I project that this week they're going to be discussing that one a lot. So it'll be
And I
interesting to
mean,
see.
and it has to go back and forth until they become the same thing, and it's both agreed
Mhm.
to, so it can move forward. So it's it's going to be interesting to see what we do and what, well, not what we do, but what they do, and see how it goes. It's, I don't even know what else to say about it because it's crazy. It gets spicy. Speaking of spicy, I was a little upset that you didn't have any committee hearings with your people. They that is my soap opera of the week to watch.
Yeah, no dick pics this week.
Damn. No, you know what we had? We had dead bodies. Like what the hell? We had dead bodies in the Senate. Just because talking about Ukraine, and it was
Mhm.
interesting because they had a Democrat and a Republican talk. And usually that Republican, I can't think of his name off the top of my head. He's staunchly, Trump. Like Trump this, Trump that. And he was like, no, if you can't agree that Ukraine needs more funding, I want you to go and see what's actually going on. And like I said, again, there are pictures of dead bodies. That's what we were doing. That's what we were watching. And I'm like, why? Like, how much did they pay for this big ass picture of this dead body? But I mean,
It also makes you wonder what they do with these big ass pictures after they get done presenting them. Like, do they shred them?
well, I would think so because it's history, right? So
Mhm.
everything that they do is recorded and taken, down. So there must be there must be a huge section of like a warehouse that is nothing, man. So 100 years from now, they're gonna go through, oh, this is what they were doing, and they're gonna come across dead bodies and dick pics.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
if we survive the next 4 years.
that's true. But we did have some interesting news. Speaking of committees, because Senate committees, they pushed through, and the Senate confirmed Cash Patel for the FBI and Howard Lutnick for the sake of commerce and Kelly Loeffler for the Small Business Association. So, we did have some good news, not really good news, but, news. I can't even say it's good news anymore. Like, that's what's sad.
Hey, I mean, they count as DEI hires because they have zero capability or experience or background
Uh,
in what they've been confirmed to. So,
I mean, and Cash Patel is not white. So, definitely DEI
yeah, yeah.
for sure.
Um, it is interesting to note that the president has been pretty active.
Oh, has he?
Yeah, and by president, I'm talking about the assistant president, President Trump.
Like the first lady?
Yeah, you could say the first lady, the power bottom, the anti-American cuck, but he did manage to publish 13 total executive actions. One of those 13 is an executive action that we talked about last week, which is that emergency declaration for Kentucky, I believe it was, as a result of the flooding that was occurring in that state. Of that 13, there were five executive orders, two proclamations, five memorandums, and of course that singular um, emergency declaration. But be anything else that was of significance from like the executive action side of things. Um, I will say that within the orders, there was, we talked last week about how there was this push for everything to be consolidated under Doge. So the Doge teams now have, or had, now have had the Doge
Either
teams now
way.
have, right. The Doge teams now have authority to tell the individual agencies who they can and cannot hire, who they can and cannot fire. And that has now expanded after Trump signed the executive order that placed Doge in charge of regulations. So now
Why
agencies
it's
can't,
just 19-year-olds.
right. And so like we talked about last week, there are now Doge teams at each agency, similar to the Russian political appointees or political officers that under the Soviet Union were pushed down to each agency. Same thing here, right? And now these regulations have to get approval through the Doge team, which by default goes all the way up to Musk. So essentially, Elon Musk is consolidating his power through his cuck, Donald Trump, and ensuring that he has the ability to determine how the government functions.
So is he like looking up to him and going, "Hey, Daddy, can we do this one this time? Is it okay if we do this one?"
probably, or,
I mean,
sir. He probably calls him sir.
or either or. I mean, it just depends on what we're doing.
Yeah, it's an interesting relationship right there, and we started out last year talking about how we thought that Donald Trump was the threat to democracy, but I'm starting to develop a theory, and that theory rolls around the philosophy of Trump is not the threat and Musk is.
He's the power top.
Yeah, I really do. I think that what is going on right now is that there is a precedent being set by which the president is no longer the authoritative figure and the advisor it now is. And it'll be interesting to see if the replacement to Trump, if there is one, does develop the authority to kind of say, hey, we're getting rid of this. More
So
importantly, it'll be interesting to see if the Doge team goes away in 2026 like they're supposed to.
So do you think he just bends him over, or do you think he lays him on his back? Like, seriously,
uh, I would say he gets bent over the desk at the Oval Office.
definitely no reach around. Definitely not.
Absolutely not. Which may be why they changed the desk after Elon Musk's son put boogers on it, is so that
I mean,
yeah,
he told him you're not the real president. So
yeah.
I mean,
But beyond that, and kind of in keeping with what we were researching this week, the only thing, let me just reiterate, Donald Trump has signed 0 executive orders to benefit the American people with regards to the cost of living in the United States. He hasn't done anything. Matter of fact, not only with egg prices going up, but inflation continues to rise.
you
Then
have to you have to give him credit though. He's too busy going to the governor, banquet and arguing with Maine's governor. So
yeah, or
that's what he's
calling
doing.
Prime Minister Trudeau Governor Trudeau because he
I mean,
seems to
that's
think
fair.
that Canada
Yeah,
is a state.
he told him to come on down for the ball. So
It's
Anyway,
ridiculous.
I'm sorry. I was like, you got to give him
No,
credit. He was a little bit. He was too busy getting bent over and talking crap. So
I mean, in keeping in that line of things, right? Like Donald Trump is pushing for the passage of the SAVE Act, which is the act that deals with voter eligibility here in the United States. While it hasn't really made much progress in the House because it was introduced in the House, I think we could see that one start to pop up now because Trump is pushing for that one to come through. But there's a lot of ramifications if
absolutely.
that were to pass. I mean, notwithstanding in Avery, I know that you and I have talked about this offline so many times about how this bill would effectively eliminate the ability for transgender Americans to vote just because their documents aren't matching because of the disarray that the government is in. At the same
Not even to
time,
mention that like it's gonna wipe out women too.
yep, that was going to be my next point.
I
Is that
apologize. I was like, it's
no,
just
you're right.
chaos.
Because, I mean, if women who get married, they change their name, right? So if they change their name, it doesn't match their birth certificate. It's going to hinder their ability to get registered as a voter because of all the hullabaloo. So, long story short, there is a lot of shit coming down because of the SAVE Act. So, and I think that that's the one thing that Trump is doing, and it'll be interesting to see how that progresses through the House and the Senate. And if it fails to progress through the House and the Senate, if Trump decides, you know what, fuck it, I'm just going to sign an executive order.
Well, I mean, here's the interesting thing. Like, in the thing about it is when you get your name changed for transgender purposes, you have a court order, and they do send it to the state that you're born in to update the birth certificate. The only issue that I could see is making sure that you order a new birth certificate, which if you don't live in that state, for me, like it costs like another $35 for to get it mailed to me. But now the issue that it would run into is your name does not match the gender marker that's going to be on your birth certificate, which people are going to argue. And, it comes back to the discrimination and the hate and opening yourself up. And I mean, I foresee more, um, just more, a lot of things. Like we're gonna see more people being attacked, like we've seen already. You know, and that's unfortunate. Last week, we focused our research on voting rights, and the states that we'll be calling out this week are Alabama, Nebraska, and Washington. They have made the vote, so come on down. I feel like you've won something. I mean, got to do something with it. Jeez, I would say better or worse. I don't know what you would like to go with it. The first one we're gonna do is Alabama HB 60. It's Alabama's Voting Rights Act Commission, and it's established to prevent discrimination in voting, duties, and membership provided. Secretary of State is required to establish a database on election administration. I wanted to make sure I had that word for word coming out of there, so that no one can say, "Hey, you misinformation. You messed that up." No, that is word for word the summary that is on that bill. Now, what will happen with that is the commission is being established to prevent discrimination in voting, duties, memberships, and this Secretary of State is going to be required to establish this database. The good thing is this would lead to automatically restoring voting rights. So it's going to be interesting. What it'll do is, like I said, restore the voting rights of individuals convicted of certain offenses upon completion of their sentence, streamlining the current process that requires application for reinstatement. So like being a felon. I don't know. You could be president and be a felon. So there's that. It's also going to absentee voting reforms. It's going to eliminate existing qualifications for absentee voting. There's also going to be, again, that establishment of the Voting Rights Commission and a statewide election administration database. So I want to hit on the fact that, for the positives, it's going to be enhanced voter accessibility. It's going to strengthen protections against discrimination and improve transparency and efficiency. Now, there were two negatives I saw in this, and it was going to be implementation challenges. And then, because there are significant changes, so it's going to take a little bit, I think, and there's probably going to be some real issues and the potential for increased administrative burden, because you're going to have to upload this database. You're going to have to make sure, you have all these voting rights that are going to be like, oh yeah, you did this, you could be in there, but someone's going to have to go in there and check it. AI can only do what AI does, and that's what you tell it to do.
So, I kind of looked at this bill with you, and what I'll say is I'm supportive of this bill just because of the way that it enhances access to the ability and the right to vote, right? So we
Absolutely.
we talked for days about the Second Amendment and how everyone should have the right to own a firearm, and we rant and rave about any type of bill or law that gets introduced that infringes upon the right to bear arms, right? But whenever we push a bill from the conservative side that infringes upon the right of people to vote, we ignore it, and we brush it to the side. And I say we because I'm a registered Republican. But the reality is that bills like these are ensuring and enshrining the right to vote. I get the negatives like implementation challenges and the potential for the increased administrative burden. But guess what? That's what the government is here for. And
Absolutely.
so,
They just hire more people.
yeah, or at the very least, I align people to specific tasks. I mean, you and I, we database every single day of every single week, and
Oh my gosh.
somehow we manage to get things accomplished, and we're able to push out a podcast like this. So it doesn't take much to database. The long and short of it, I fully support this, especially the
Absolutely.
absentee thing, right? Like you and I were talking offline, and there's this really big push to eliminate absentee voting and force people to vote in person. And I'm all about it.
I like the early
If
voting that lets you do it in person too.
Right. And again, I'm all about it if, right? And that if is if we establish that voting day is a national freaking holiday. Period. No ifs,
There's
ands,
a
or
push
buts,
for
no
it.
questions. And that's the way that's the only way that I would get behind any type of move to eliminate vote by mail or restrict vote by mail and force the in-person voting. Beyond that, like, come on, man, like we've got to figure things out. And if we are enhancing voter eligibility and ensuring that voters have the ability to get to their polling place, then this is a good thing. Now, what I'll say is that this, like you said, it was a Democrat introduced bill in a heavily Republican state. I don't see this going very far because of what I said earlier about conservatives not being worried about infringing on the right to vote the way that they're worried about infringing on the right to keep and bear arms.
Usually I would agree with you, but in some states, like I believe it's Mississippi, Mississippi's doing backwards things. They are more so, hey, yeah, we're gonna let these things pass. So the South is kind of we're seeing we're seeing some things happen that I wouldn't normally say that we see.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to keep an eye on this one and see how far it goes. So,
Um,
when we circle back around to this topic, we can review them and say, hey, guess what?
I guess we'll jump to Nebraska then. Nebraska had LB 541, and it was going to eliminate online voter registration, restrict voter registration by mail, require grounds for early voting, require hand counts of ballots, and change provisions relating to voter registration and voting. Again, that's what this title is. That's what it says word for word. What's interesting is this is nonpartisan introduced. And I don't usually see bills that are nonpartisan that come through. It's either usually Democratic or Republican. So and what's crazy is I I didn't support this one. It wants to eliminate online voter registration. That's how a lot of people register. And I think that's a good way to get people, especially young people, to vote. They also restricted mail-in voter registration. Again, a lot of people are too busy to just show up in person just to register. And then there was justification for early voting. I like the early voting. It helps people, especially, people who are kind of like how it was COVID. Like there were some people who had to work and some people didn't. If they're an essential worker, let them you let them early vote, and mandatory hand counting of ballots. That kind of goes saying enhanced election security, which is a potential positive, and increased voter confidence. There were three negatives, and that's kind of like my thing. If the negatives outweigh the positives, then for me, there's an issue and it needs to be rethought. Same thing. That's just how it is for me. Reduced accessibility.
And that one right there, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but the accessibility piece, right? Like that right there is the most important thing for me when it comes to the this bill, right? Like just like you, I
Right.
don't support it. I don't support it because of all of the restrictions that it's putting into place, but it's reducing accessibility. And we'll talk about it in one of the Washington bills when we get to it. But Republicans have acknowledged in that Washington bill, they acknowledge that, you know, the mail-in voting has increased voter turnout, but they're still trying to restrict it. Same thing here. Mail-in voting, early voting, online voter registration, all of those things increase voter accessibility. And because they increase voter accessibility, they increase voter turnout. And so doing something like this is the opposite. And this is exactly what we talk about when we talk about voter suppression, right? Like I'm going to be honest with you, and Avery, I know you were on a thing, but this is going the opposite direction. Like we're
Absolutely.
going in the direction of we're just going to make it so hard and so difficult for people to vote that people aren't going to vote. And when people don't vote, that means that the minority continues to maintain its hold of our political system. And folks, voting is your core duty as an American citizen. I don't care if you don't pay taxes. I don't care if you don't go and serve as a juror. What I care about is whether or not you are going to do your core duty every year and vote. And I say every year because there are elections every year. There are topics to be voted on every year, maybe not in your specific location, but across the nation, right? It doesn't matter because all of these things are different. That's how democracy works.
And we touched on before the election that it was just, we don't care who you vote for, even if we don't agree with you, just go out and vote. That's what we want to see. And I agree too that the reduced accessibility really pisses me off, because you're suppressing those who have disabilities, who are rural residents, and individuals with demanding schedules, like we talked about. Like, holy shit, those people should be able to vote as well. And
Mhm.
you got the resource intensiveness part of this, where manual ballot counting is labor intensive, time consuming, and it's leading to costs that and delays. So, and you're known to, I don't know about you, but even if I'm counting like a lot of money, my dollars stick together, and I'm missing counts, so I foresee that happening. But you're right. The whole potential voter suppression really pissed me off. So I'm not even going to go on a tangent about it. It's stupid.
Yeah, this is one of those things where I foresee if this does get passed, we could see a definite suppression of the voter turnout in this state, which will impact the lives of Americans nationwide. So,
Yeah.
um,
Alabama's going to do
yeah.
what Alabama does. So speaking of, hey, you want to hit Washington? I know those are the ones that you were ready for.
I'll start with Washington HB 1584, right? And this was a Republican introduced bill, and this is kind of one that I kind of alluded to earlier. In this bill, right, literally it states, while recognizing vote by mail has increased voter turnout, and then goes on to talk about the need for eliminating vote by mail or restricting vote by mail and going to requirement for in-person voting. I don't know how to talk to the negative repercussions, right? Like, yeah, are there potential positives like enhanced ballot security? Sure. We already have established that voting by mail is not insecure. It's probably more secure than any other form of voting, largely because of the fact that if I put my vote in or my ballot in the mail, which is controlled by the US Postal Service, which is a federal institution and they're governed by federal laws, then that ballot is going to get to where it needs to go quick, fast, and in a hurry. And then you have tracking features which allow you to track where your ballot is and how far it's made it and whether it's been counted. All of those things are there, right? They exist.
Well,
So
my only concern going on right now is Trump is saying he wants to either take over the postal service or shut it down. So, I mean, I wouldn't be too sure about mail-in voting at this point. That's my
yeah,
only
and
my only concession. Sorry.
you're right. You're
And
100%
that's
right.
that's just
I
another
would
negative for me.
I would say the courts are going to protect the postal service, but at the same time, we've already seen that Trump has the willingness to go against the postal service. That's not here nor there.
It's just a
Like
negative for me. So,
it's this bill is an all out effort to suppress, and it's not even one of those like we're going to slide this in there and not talk about the fact that it suppresses the vote, because they talk about the fact that it suppresses the vote in the bill itself. I think this is a blatant effort by Washington Republicans to reduce the number of Democratic voters that are going to turn out on voting day and allow them to maintain their power. So again, suppression, 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 right? We talk about this process by which, we want Americans to have guns so that they can stand up to a tyrannical government, but we don't want Americans to use their vote and their voice to prevent the rise of a tyrannical government. It's ludicrous and beyond belief to me the way that they go through this. They talk to the, the enhanced ballot security because it reduces the risk of tampering, fraud, and coercion. Well, guess what? When I go into my voting place in person, I have to deal with people heckling me, or I have to deal with concern that my vote in person might be called out by people that I don't agree with, or there are armed people surrounding the voting place. All of those things are going to come into effect. And I'm really going to think about that process. I mean, there's a reason that we have private voting. And that reason that we have private voting is because of the fact that coercion existed. Now, they tie coercion to, if people are voting from home, then there's a risk that they're being coerced at home to vote a certain way. Sure, understood. I get that process. I understand that mentality, although those cases and those instances haven't been proven. And there has not been a case where that has been something that is a valid concern outside of Republicans trying to find a way to suppress the vote.
Or you have, like what I have dealt with in the past until I changed my name was, hey, I don't know if I can allow you to vote because you don't look like, my dead name. And,
Mhm.
there was a little bickering, and then finally it was like, yeah, you can go ahead and vote. I'm like, thanks, I appreciate that. Like, so again, like you said, if I have to go through those things, I'm good. My mental health, I'm good. But hey, they say I'm mentally insane anyway, so whatever.
So that was the Republican side of the House, or the Republican side of the political spectrum, pushing a bill in order to quote unquote enhance voter security, or
Now,
election security. On the flip side of that, Washington introduced SB 5014, which is on the Senate, of the state legislator. And this one deals with election security writ large, right? So it provides for cybersecurity measures, and it provides for auditing procedures, things that are real, true, tangible things that can be instituted in order to ensure security of the, and they are done in a way that eliminates the risk of suppressing the vote, right? So it doesn't hinder or prevent people from getting the vote out. What it does is it acts on the backside of things in order to ensure that the vote is safe, secure, and legal. Um, so, I mean, this right here, again, I support it. Democrat introduced, and I support it because it enhances security, but it doesn't prevent voters from voting. And folks, anything that you get from me is that I don't care how you vote. I just want you to vote. God damn it! Like, go use your voice. And so when it comes to voting, what you'll hear from me, and what I'm sure you'll hear from Avery, is if there is a law out there that purports to ensuring security of the vote, but it suppresses the voter, we're against it. I'm against it. But if it
yeah,
is out there that doesn't suppress the voter and enhances security, all for it, 100%.
right. If this bill had been Republican introduced, I still would have said, hey, yeah, because this aligns with what should happen.
Mhm.
If we're gonna vote online, I want it protected. If we're gonna vote by mail, I want it protected. If I'm gonna vote in person, I want it protected. I mean, the only thing that is the issue with this is implementation cost. But once it's implemented, you should be okay. There'll be some minimizing, minimal costs throughout the years. But I mean, this is going to be a good thing if it's passed. And resource allocation. I mean, that's I mean, that's what expected. They're gonna have those things, and that's what it should
They're
have.
the government.
Right.
That's their
It's
job.
just, I mean, that's just, I don't, I don't know what they think. I just, sometimes they just do what they do. Just like I told you earlier, Alabama going to do what Alabama does. I mean, there's, there's no way to describe it other than that. I mean, sometimes it's forwards and sometimes it's backwards.
Yeah, I mean, so at the end of the day, There are a ton of pieces of legislation out there dealing with election security. There are a ton of pieces of legislation out there dealing with voter suppression or ensuring voter access. We chose these three states just because these three states are the ones that stood out to us, and we don't have the time to cover everything, right? So at the end of the day,
No.
it's important to do your research. Like,
Every
always do
state,
your research.
every state has thousands of bills, thousands of bills. Before their congressional time started, their session, they were already pre-filed bills. We're talking hundreds of bills. That's why we have databases.
Jeez. No, database upon databases. But at the end of the day, it's important to know what your laws are, know what your representatives at your state level are pushing, because at the end of the day, your state level legislatures are the ones that are going to have the most influence on you. So know what they're doing, know how they're voting, know what they're voting on, know what's being introduced.
And I mean, we're not going to try to push you one way or the other. We just want you to be informed. You know, your
Correct.
opinion doesn't have to align with my opinion. You know, I know that's why I served. I could probably say that that's why Carl served. That way, everyone has their freedoms. That's what I believe in. You know, and whether it was kneeling or standing for the national anthem, I don't care. That's your right. You know, whether you vote or not vote, or you vote for the person that I want to vote for or not, I don't care. Just do it. Like that's what people lived and died for. And I rest my case on that.
Oh, I don't know. I think that there should be a law in place that imposes a fine on every American of voting age who does not vote. But
Either here
that's
nor there.
that's all we have for today. We've covered a lot of ground, and we hope that you picked up some useful information about what's happening in politics right now. Next week, we plan to be taking a look at marijuana legislation around the states. So that should be an interesting and a fun one to explore. So we hope you stay tuned and tune in next week.
And like Carl said, thanks for hanging out with us today. Politics can be pretty wild sometimes. I expect the next one to be pretty wild. So it's going to be great. And honestly, we really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen.
And remember, folks, stay informed
Stay engaged.
and always color outside the political lines.